Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my riding experience in college, and more specifically, how much it cost me to ride horses in college, riding on an IHSA team. So the reason I wanted to make this video is because I've always really had an interest in personal finance, and obviously I'm an equestrian, I love horses, and I've always felt like there wasn't enough transparency in the equestrian community about how people afford this, especially normal people that don't just have buttloads of money. And when I grew up, I took lessons, but my parents never allowed me to have my own horse because obviously it's pretty expensive, especially if you want to take lessons and you want to show. So now that I'm getting older, and I'm being on my own dime, working my own job, and looking to hopefully have a horse of my own one day, I've gotten really interested in just understanding the economics of how normal people afford to ride horses. And so I just wanted to hopefully bring a little bit of transparency if you're someone that's interested in riding in college as well. And hopefully this video just gives you a sense of how much it costs. This is just my personal experience, but I hope this helps you in some way. There's obviously a lot of different levels of how expensive horses cost. I mean, on the low end, you have someone that just maybe takes lessons once a week and doesn't show or doesn't have a horse of their own. And then you can go all the way up on the high end of someone that takes 3 or 4 lessons a week, has multiple horses, goes to multiple A-rated shows, you know, all that. And what I did in terms of riding in college was definitely on the lower end, and I'll explain more about the specifics of how IHSA works in a minute, but I'm just going to give a little quick background on me before we get into this. So when I was a little kid, I started taking actually Western pleasure lessons. Even though in college I rode on the English IHSA team, I didn't ride Western at all. So as a kid, I just took a weekly lesson. I would do maybe 4 local shows a year. It was pretty affordable. And then as I got into high school, where I was riding, the barn I was at, everything just kind of fell apart there, and I got busy with other activities, started playing volleyball, so I did not ride horses at all throughout high school. But coming into college, you know, if you're a horse person, the desire never really leaves, and you always kind of have that horse bug. And so coming into college, I was I really wanted to ride again, and I was Googling, different riding teams at different schools, and when I would see a team's IHSA page, it would say we need riders from all different skill levels. And so I thought, well, that might work for me because I was basically going to be relearning how to ride again. So I went to the University of Georgia and I joined the club team there. And when I joined the team, mind you, since I hadn't ridden horses in so long, and even what I'd done before that was kind of minimal, I never showed very competitively or had my own horse. Some of the girls that come onto the team are used to having their own horses and used to going to shows and lessons. So they're kind of used to paying for that every month, but I was not. And so it was very important to me that I did it in a way that was affordable, or else there was no way I would have been able to ride horses in college. So now I'm going to give you some background about what IHSA is if you don't know, how IHSA worked at my school, and how I've heard it working at some other schools as well, in terms of the lesson program, how you pay for it, all that kind of stuff. So, for those of you that don't know, IHSA stands for Intercollegiate Horse Show Association. My understanding is that it's kind of affiliated with IEA, if you know what that is. I think that's more for the high school or the middle school level, and IHSA is just kind of the college version of it. And so what happens at an IHSA show is you compete on behalf of your college and university, and so you earn points as an individual and you earn points as a team, and if you reach a certain number of points by the end of the year as an individual, you get to go to regionals, zones, nationals. Same thing with teams. The teams with the most points get to kind of progress on to the next level. And the other big thing about it is that you're not going to these shows and competing on your own horses. When you go to the shows, you pull a random name out of a hat. You get randomly assigned a horse pretty much. But the whole point of this is that so schools can't basically make themselves win by having push button horses. Now, some schools have a lot more money pumped into their program, which definitely helps them win. I'm not going to say that it's not affected by that at all, but it definitely helps even it out if one school has really nice horses and one school has horses that are a little bit more like all over the place, you know. You're also being judged on your equitation, so it's more about how you look as a rider and how effective you are with the horse you've been assigned instead of how fancy the horse you have may be. So that's another reason why you're kind of drawing a random horse, because it really wants to test your ability as an equestrian and how you're able to kind of adapt to a different horse in a certain situation. And you don't get any warm-up time or anything like that. Your horse's name gets pulled. You get to watch some school. You get to watch the other people that ride them in the classes before you, if there are classes before you, and they put you on and you go into the ring and you just do it. And there is flat work, so you're in the arena with all the other people in your class. And then there's also jumping courses, all at different levels. Like I said, I basically completely relearned how to ride in college. I hadn't ridden in years and I'd never ridden English before. So I was in the introductory division. That's the most basic. That's just walk trot. Then you move up to walk trot canter. And then you move up to varying levels of jumping and flat classes. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about how IHSA worked at my college, and then I'll also tell you about how I've heard it works at some different colleges to kind of give you a better range, and then I'll jump into what my specific numbers were. So like I said, I went to the University of Georgia. We have a varsity team, varsity equestrian team, and a club equestrian team. And our IHSA team was considered the club team. Our varsity team was it's either NCAA or NCEA team. And so that was our varsity team, school sponsored completely. For some schools, their IHSA team is their varsity team. So their IHSA team is largely school sponsored. Ours was not, and so we were paying for a lot of things ourselves. But once again, because you are taking lessons on different horses every week, you are not required to have your own horse. Now, some girls did, and a lot of the times we would use those horses in our lesson program every week. We would ride some of our trainers' horses. We would ride some of the horses that were being boarded at the barn where we rode. But yeah, it just depends. We rode at a private barn and we did not ride at a school paid for barn or anything like that. Now at my school, we had a once a week lesson and we would have meetings, team meetings on Tuesday nights every other week. You'd usually have some sort of community servicing you would do a semester and different team bonding events. The catch is, so while being on a varsity team is great because largely everything you're doing is being paid for by the school, there's also a lot more stipulations that come with it. So maybe those people are getting to lesson 2 or 3 times a week instead of just once, which that part's great, but a lot of the times there's a lot of other requirements of being an athlete. A lot of them have 6 a.m. workouts multiple mornings out of the week. So it's just kind of a different atmosphere depending on what type of school that you went to. For me, the time commitment of being on a team that was considered a club team was also important because there's no way I would have been able to take like 3 lessons a week with my school schedule and everything else I had going on. So once a week made it fun because, you know, you wanted to show up every week and do your best, but it was also still more of a hobby. And we would typically we'd usually have like 3 shows a semester, more in the fall and in the spring usually, and you would usually go to at least 2 of those. You were guaranteed at least 1 show a semester. A lot of the club officers would go to all the shows. A lot of times I went to like 2 a semester. So now I'm going to get into the part that you all actually came to hear about what it cost me to ride in college. So the big expense you had every month was your monthly lesson fee, and that was usually $225 every month. So each of our lessons cost $50 individually, and you would have 4 lessons out of the month, and your lesson would usually be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour, and you usually had a lesson buddy or two, so there were like 2 or 3 of you in the arena at one time. So that was $200 a month, and then they also just added a regular $25 because that would go to help replace team tack, brushes, all those types of barn materials. We also had a $50 semester fee. Honestly, I don't really know what this was for. I think it was more of the same, just little things that the team needed to buy that we would help pitch in with. So there was that. Now, the shows could cost anywhere from $100 to $200, and this depends on whether or not the show was a 2-day show, which a 2-day IHSA show is actually considered 2 separate shows. But if you went to a 2-day show, that was obviously more up in the 200s. And it also depends on how many classes you were in. I was always only in 1 class, but some girls would be in 2 classes, and so that would make it a little bit more expensive, not crazy. And then the cheapest show that I think I ever paid for was the one day I showed at our own hosted show, and that was because there was no gas fee or hotel fee. So yeah, when you went to a show, that's usually what you're paying for: hotel, gas, show fee, coaching fee for that day, and that was pretty much what it was. And so honestly, $100 to $200 for a show, if you know anything about the horse world, is actually really cheap. And so yeah, you're usually paying this like about twice a semester. And we would also have clinics occasionally. I would say we'd have clinics anywhere from like 2 to 3 times a year. And a clinic could be anywhere from $50 to $100. Sometimes the team would help pitch in funds so that the individual costs would be a little bit less. The clinics I honestly didn't really start doing until my junior year. It was kind of expensive to be expected to pay for clinics and also go to shows, just for me personally, and we were never forced to do clinics. Clinics were always optional. Obviously, they were usually fun. You learned a lot as a rider, and it did make you look good if you wanted to go to more shows because it showed you were committed to the team. But yeah, I didn't really start doing clinics until my junior year, and that was the COVID year that IHSA didn't have any shows, and so paying for the clinics was kind of a replacement of the shows for me. And you also have your show clothes that you are responsible for buying. And I didn't have a lot when I first started riding because I hadn't ridden in years, I hadn't ridden English. And that's one of the great things about being on a team, is that all the girls on my team were so nice, and a lot of people let me borrow their show coat or something like that until I was able to get my own. So the type of helmet I had was a 1K helmet. That was about $250, and this is compared to a Sam Shield or a Charles Owen helmet, which is what a lot of people also had, and those could run more in the $500 range. You would also see people in more the beginner levels having what you would call like a schooling helmet, which could maybe be anywhere from like $50 to $100. Obviously, the more you pay, just like the nicer helmet it is. And I was comfortable paying for something that was more mid-range. I mean, $250 for a helmet is not cheap, but it's still half of what the $500 helmets cost. And I asked for that as a Christmas present one year, and so that was like one of my big Christmas gifts from my parents. I believe my show shirt, my white show shirt, was also a Christmas gift from my parents. I bought my breeches myself, my tan show breeches, and our team actually sometimes would have a sponsorship or have a partnership with some sort of equestrian apparel brand. And so one semester, Ariat gave us a discount on some things, and so I think I got a $100 pair of breeches for $50, and those were my tan show breeches. I also bought my show coat off of one of my former teammates. She was not riding on the team anymore, but we were like the same size. So I got really lucky with that because it worked out perfectly. I paid $150 for this jacket, but I definitely think it was a nice jacket. It was like a $400 jacket. And I think she got it on sale for $300, and then she used it for a year and I bought it off of her. So it was expensive, but I definitely paid a lot less for it than I could have. And I know sometimes you can look to an old team member to buy something from them or wait for a sale, or sometimes there are equestrian resale stores you could go to. And my show boots, I usually rode in my lessons in a pair of paddock boots I had and half chaps, and then I had my tall black boots that I would wear to shows. They honestly were not the nicest, and they didn't fit my legs great or my calf great. So that was definitely something I would have probably invested more money in hindsight. They were $100 pair of boots. They were synthetic, but they were actually, because they were synthetic, they were really easy to clean. And I only ever wore them for shows or clinics, so they held up very nice. But they were cheap. They made my calf look a lot bigger than it actually was. But from a distance, when you're in the show ring, it wasn't that bad. I bought them when I first started riding freshman year, and so I wasn't sure what my commitment to the team was yet, so I didn't want to put a few hundred into them, which in hindsight I would have, but it was fine just the way it was. Like I said, especially when you're in the lower levels of IHSA, they're not super picky with how nice your clothes are. Obviously, some things make you look more professional. Like, I do think a nicer helmet goes a long way in making you look more like you know what you're doing. Unfortunately, the judges aren't blind to that, and it just kind of plays into your perception of things. But also, it's not necessary to have the nicest things ever. Oh, and my gloves were like a $15, $20 pair of black gloves. Loved them. They were super comfy and held up well. So yeah, that was pretty much what it cost me to ride horses in college. And so depending on what perspective you're coming from, that could sound cheap or that could sound expensive if you're not used to being in the equestrian world or riding horses. It was definitely costly, but once again, it's so much less costly than owning your own horse when you're paying to board it somewhere and maybe going to multiple shows a week. I mean, I'm sure some people spend upward of, $1,000 or even $1,500 on their horse a month if you are going to shows a lot. And I'm sure some people spend way more than that. But IHSA is definitely the more affordable way to do things, albeit it's not free. So if you're wondering, like I am because I'm nosy, how did people afford this? I'll tell you how I afforded it and then kind of tell you how I saw some of my teammates affording it as well. So for me, pretty much my parents ended up paying for my monthly lessons, and I would pay for my show fees or clinic fees. Like I said, I bought some of my show clothes, but they also got some of them for me as Christmas presents. I'm super fortunate to be in a position where my parents helped me out. Sometimes I'm like surprised that they did because, like I said, I hadn't ridden horses for a while before college. But I wasn't in a sorority, so I think maybe that had something to do with it. The riding horses was kind of like my version of being in a sorority. So I'm super grateful that they did that. A lot of the girls on the team also had jobs to pay for it. Some of them even worked at the barn where we rode. And some of the girls also half-leased horses, and so they would have that cost on top of their lesson costs, which obviously gets more expensive. I don't know explicitly what they did, but for a lot of them, I'm sure it was a combination of their parents helping them out financially and them also working a job to afford it. I never had like a real job during the school year. I would have one during the summer, but I pet sit for people a lot, and so I was pretty much using some of my pet sitting money to pay for the horse shows. Yeah, that's pretty much what it cost me to ride horses in college. And I'm going to leave this video here because I don't want it to get too long-winded, but if you have any other questions, any questions about my IHSA experience or about riding horses in college, feel free to comment and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope this video was helpful. Bye.